Captain Hei-yun stood at the window of her small ship, the Whisper. The ship was tiny compared to other human vessels. Most people made fun of it, calling it the space rowboat. But Hei-yun loved her ship. It was quick, quiet, and perfect for diplomatic missions. She was drinking her morning coffee when the emergency message arrived. The screen lit up with bright red letters. Hei-yun nearly dropped her cup when she read it. "Captain, we have found them. Both of them. The Crystalline Empire and the Void Collective. They are real." Hei-yun called her crew to the bridge right away. They were the smallest crew in Earth's fleet, just 8 people. But they were the best at what they did. "Everyone," she said, looking at their faces, "you know the stories about the endless war. The one that has been going on for 800,000 years. We just got proof it's real." Officer Minho raised his hand. "Captain, my grandfather used to tell me stories about 2 mighty alien races fighting forever. Are you saying those stories are true?" "Yes," Hei-yun said. She pressed a button, and a map appeared in the air. It showed 2 massive fleets of ships. One fleet sparkled like diamonds in space. The other was dark, barely visible against the stars. They were facing each other, ready to fight. Professor Ta-hyun, their language expert, spoke next. "I studied their languages for years. Everyone thought I was wasting my time. They said these aliens weren't real." Hei-yun nodded. "And now we found them. Earth has tried to contact them for 50 years, but their warships are so big and powerful, they never noticed our signals. They thought we were too small to matter." Ambassador Kita walked onto the bridge. He looked worried. "The council wants us to try talking to them. They think our ship is perfect for this job." "Our ship?" Officer Yoonjae laughed. "The Whisper is the smallest ship Earth has. Why would they pick us?" "Because we're small," Hei-yun said with a smile. "Big warships might scare them, make them think we want to fight. But the Whisper, we're like a tiny fish swimming up to 2 fighting whales. They might actually listen to us." Dr. Jaewon, who studied alien cultures, agreed. "Sometimes the smallest voice can stop the loudest fight." Hei-yun looked at her crew. They were young. Their ship was small, but maybe that's exactly what was needed to end the longest war in history. "Set course for the battle zone," she ordered. "And power up our translation systems. We have a war to stop." The Whisper turned smoothly in space. Its engines were quiet, barely leaving a trace. As they moved closer, they could see the 2 mighty fleets better. The crystalline ships looked like floating cities made of diamond. The void ships were dark and strange, seeming to bend the light around them. Hei-yun watched her crew prepare for their mission. Sunmai was setting up the meeting room with care. Hyunwoo was checking their defense shields, even though they wouldn't help much against such powerful weapons. "Captain," Minho called out, "we're getting signals from both fleets. They see us." Hei-yun took a deep breath. This was the moment that would change everything. Their small ship was about to meet 2 of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. "Open a channel," she said. "Let's introduce ourselves." The Whisper moved forward, a tiny dot of hope between 2 ancient enemies. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest things. And maybe, just maybe, humanity's smallest ship would do what no one else had done in 800,000 years. Bring peace to the stars. Ambassador Kita straightened his uniform as he prepared for the most important meeting of his life. The Whisper had managed to position itself between the 2 massive alien fleets. Both sides had agreed to send representatives to the small human ship. "Are we ready?" he asked, looking around the cramped meeting room. It was the largest room on the Whisper, but it was still tiny compared to most diplomatic vessels. Dr. Jaewon nodded as she arranged the last chairs. "The room is set up, though I must say it's going to be quite cozy in here." The first guests arrived in a flash of light. 3 tall beings made of crystal stepped into the room. They sparkled like diamonds, and their voices sounded like wind chimes. Professor Tahyun's translation device worked quickly to convert their musical speech into words. "We are the voice of the crystal," they sang. "We speak for the Empire of Light." Minutes later, 3 more beings appeared. These were the representatives of the Void Collective. They looked like pieces of night sky walking around. Stars seemed to shine inside them. Their voices were deep and echoed strangely. "The collective hears," they rumbled. "The collective speaks." Kaita bowed to both groups. "Welcome aboard the Earth ship Whisper. We are honored by your presence." The crystal beings looked around the small room. "This vessel is tiny," they chimed. "How do you travel between stars in such a small ship?" The void beings asked. "We manage," Kita smiled. "Sometimes being small has its advantages. Please, sit down." The aliens had to sit close to each other because the room was so small. At first, they seemed uncomfortable. But as the meeting went on, something interesting happened. Dr. Jaiwan noticed it first. The crystal being's light was reflecting beautifully off the void being's dark surfaces. The void being's star-like spots cast pretty shadows through the crystal beings. Together, they made the room look like a beautiful night sky. "Your kinds complement each other," she said softly. Both groups looked surprised, as if they had never thought about this before. Professor Tahyun spoke next. He had studied both their languages. "Your words are different, but they share similar roots. Did you know that?" The aliens looked at each other with new interest. 800,000 years of fighting had made them forget how to see beauty in their differences. Captain Haeyun watched from the corner as Kita led the talks. The ambassador was careful and respectful. He didn't tell them what to do. Instead, he asked questions about their war. "Why did the fighting start?" he asked. The answers surprised everyone. The crystal beings said it was about honor. The void beings said it was about territory. But when Kita asked them to explain more, neither side could remember the exact reason. 800,000 years is a long time, Kita said gently. "Perhaps it's time to look forward instead of backward." The meeting lasted for hours. When it ended, both sides agreed to meet again the next day. As they left, the crystal beings and void beings looked at each other differently than before. "Did you see that?" Yoonji whispered to Haeyun. They didn't glare at each other when they left. Haeyun smiled. Sometimes people need a small space to see big truths. And sometimes the smallest ship in the fleet can do the biggest things. The Whisper floated quietly between the 2 massive fleets. Inside, its crew prepared for another day of talks. They might be small, but they had done something important today. They had made 2 ancient enemies sit together and talk. It was a small step, but sometimes small steps led to big changes. Officer Yoonji sat in the Whisper's observation room, watching the 2 massive fleets. The crystal ships shone like stars, while the void ships looked like holes in space. But something about them bothered her. She pulled up her computer and started taking notes. Captain Haeyun found her there 3 hours later, still working. "You missed dinner," the captain said, placing a warm cup of tea beside her. "Captain, I found something important," Yoonji said, pointing to her screen. "Look at these ships. They're beautiful and powerful, but do you notice what's missing?" Haeyun looked carefully at the images. "What do you see?" "There are no small ships," Yoonji explained. "No cargo vessels, no civilian transports, no family ships. It's all warships. Where are their people?" This observation interested Haeyun. She called a meeting with the crew to discuss it. They gathered in the ship's small dining room, which doubled as their meeting space. "I think Yoonji has found something important," Haeyun told her crew. "We've been so impressed by their warships that we forgot to ask about their people." Dr. Jaiwan nodded slowly. "In all our talks, they only discuss military matters. They never mention families or civilian life." Professor Tahyun added, "Their languages have many words for war, but few for peace. It's like they've forgotten how to talk about normal life." Ambassador Kita decided to change his approach for the next meeting. When the alien representatives arrived, he asked them about their homes instead of their war. The crystal beings grew quiet. One of them finally spoke. "Our civilian ships stay hidden in asteroid fields. It has been this way for a very long time. Our people live in deep space pockets," the void beings admitted. They cannot remember the last time they saw a sun up close. The human crew looked at each other. 800,000 years of war had forced both civilizations to hide their families away. Their people lived in darkness and fear while their mighty warships fought on. Yunji asked for permission to speak. "May I show you something?" She displayed pictures from Earth, cities, parks, children playing, ships of all sizes flying freely. "This is how we live," she explained. "Our ships carry families. Our space stations are full of schools and gardens. We're not powerful like you, but our people can see the stars whenever they want." The aliens watched in silence. The crystal beings' light dimmed a little. The void beings seemed to shrink in on themselves. "How long has it been?" one crystal being asked its void counterpart. "Since your children have played under starlight." "How long since your people have built something that was not for war?" The void being replied softly. Heiyun watched as the two ancient enemies began to talk about something other than fighting. They shared stories about their hidden cities, their scattered families, their lost traditions. Sometimes, Heiyun wrote in her log that night, "You need someone small to point out the big things you've lost." The Whisper's crew spent the rest of the day listening to the aliens talk about their civilian lives. Both sides began to remember what they had forgotten, that there was more to life than winning a war no one could even remember starting. As the alien representatives prepared to leave, they looked out the Whisper's windows at their massive warships. For the first time in thousands of years, these mighty vessels didn't look like symbols of power. Instead, they looked like what they really were, giant barriers keeping their people apart. Communications specialist Minho was not having a good day. The translation system kept mixing up words during the peace talks. He worked alone in his small office on the Whisper, trying to fix the problem. "These old war records don't make sense," he said to himself, looking through ancient data from both sides. The computer showed him thousands of documents about the war's beginning. Suddenly, he noticed something strange. He checked it 3 times to be sure. Then he ran to find Captain Heiyun. He found her in the ship's command room. "Captain," he said, out of breath, "I found something important, really important." Heiyun looked up from her work. "What did you find?" "The reason they started fighting," Minho explained. "It was about a special space rock, a whole asteroid belt full of rare materials. Both sides needed these materials 800,000 years ago." "That's not new information, Minho," Heiyun said gently. "No, you don't understand," Minho said excitedly. "They don't need those materials anymore. Both sides developed new technology thousands of years ago. They can make these materials in their ships now. They're fighting over something they don't even need." Heiyun's eyes went wide. She called an emergency meeting with the whole crew. They gathered quickly in the small meeting room. Ambassador Kita listened carefully to Minho's discovery. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" he asked. Minho nodded. "Look at their ship designs from the past 100 years. Both sides have machines that can create any material they need. They don't have to mine asteroids anymore." Professor Tahyun checked the translation records. He's right. Their languages changed over time. The words they use for those materials now mean created or manufactured, not mined. They've been fighting for thousands of years over resources they can make themselves, Dr. Jaiwan said quietly. They just never stopped to realize it. The next day, during the peace talks, Minho asked for permission to speak. He was nervous. He usually just worked with computers, not important alien leaders. "Respected leaders," he said, his voice shaking a little. "May I show you something about your ships?" The crystal beings and void beings nodded. Minho displayed the information he had found. He showed them how their technology had changed over time. He explained how both sides had solved their resource problems long ago without realizing it. The room grew very quiet. The crystal being's light flickered in surprise. The void beings seemed to ripple with shock. Is this true? One crystal being asked its engineers through a communication link. The answer came back quickly. Yes, they had been making their own materials for thousands of years. The void beings checked with their scientists too. They got the same answer. We have been fighting, a void being said slowly, over resources we no longer need. Why did no one notice this before? A crystal being asked. Sometimes, Minho said carefully, when you're focused on fighting, it's hard to see how much things have changed. Sometimes you need someone from outside to point out the obvious. The alien leaders looked at each other, 800,000 years of war. And the answer had been in their own ships all along. They just needed a human working in a tiny office on a small ship to find it. That evening, Minho sat at his desk, still amazed by what had happened. Captain He-yun came to see him. "Good work today," she said with a smile. "You may have just helped end the longest war in history." Minho looked at his small computer screen. "I guess big discoveries can happen in small places," he said. Captain He-yun knew she was about to break many rules. She called her crew together to explain her plan. "We're going to have an informal gathering," she told them. "No uniforms, no formal speeches, just talking and sharing food." Ambassador Kita looked worried. "Captain, that's against every diplomatic rule we have. These are two of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy." "Exactly," He-yun said. "For 800,000 years, everyone has treated them like powerful enemies. Maybe it's time to treat them like people." Sunme, the cultural attaché, raised her hand. "I have an idea. In Korea, we have a traditional tea ceremony. It's peaceful and brings people together. Maybe we could try that." He-yun smiled. "Perfect. Can you set it up?" The next day, when the crystal beings and void beings arrived for talks, they found the meeting room completely changed. The formal tables were gone. Instead, there were comfortable cushions on the floor. The room smelled like sweet tea and fresh flowers. "What is this?" a crystal being asked, its light flickering with confusion. "This is how humans get to know each other," He-yun explained. "Please, sit with us." The aliens looked unsure, but they sat down. The room was so small that everyone had to sit close together. Sunmai began the tea ceremony, explaining each step as she went. "In our culture," she said, "sharing tea is a way to share peace. Each person serves tea to others, showing respect and care." At first, the aliens were stiff and formal. But as Sunmai taught them how to hold the cups and serve each other, something changed. A crystal being carefully poured tea for a void being. The void being's star-like spots sparkled with surprise. "Your light makes the tea look beautiful," the void being said to its crystal counterpart. "Your darkness makes my light shine brighter," the crystal being replied. Professor Tahyun noticed they were speaking differently. "Their language patterns are changing," he whispered to Hyun. "They're using older, more peaceful words." As they shared tea, they began to talk about things besides war. The crystal beings spoke about their art, how they created light sculptures that could dance. The void beings described their music, songs made from the echoes of stars. Dr. Jaiwon watched as ancient enemies began to see each other as people. "The tea ceremony is helping them remember who they were before the war," she said softly. Officer Yoonji brought out some earth sweets to share. The aliens were curious about the food. Soon, they were talking about their own traditional foods, things their people had not made in thousands of years. "Our children would like these sweets," a void being said sadly. "But they have never tasted anything from outside their hiding places." "Our young ones have never seen your star songs," a crystal being added. "They would find them beautiful." Hyun watched as the conversation turned to hopes for the future. The aliens talked about what peace could mean. about children playing together, about sharing art and music, about building things that were not weapons. At the end of the day, no formal agreements were made. But when the aliens left, they bowed to each other the way Sun Mai had taught them. It was a small gesture, but it was the first peaceful tradition these ancient civilizations had shared in 800,000 years. Sometimes, Heian wrote in her log, the biggest changes start with a simple cup of tea. Science officer Hyunwoo spent 3 days studying data from both alien fleets. The Whisper's small science lab was filled with charts and numbers. He had asked both sides to share information about their technology, and to his surprise, they had agreed. Captain, he called Heian on the ship's communication system. I need to show you something amazing. When Heian arrived, Hyunwoo pointed to his screens. Look at how their technologies have grown. The crystal beings learned to use light in ways we never imagined. The void beings mastered dark energy. But here's the interesting part. They each solved problems the other side still struggles with. Heian looked closely at the data. You mean they could help each other? Exactly, Hyunwoo said. The crystal beings' light technology could help void beings protect their civilian ships better. And the void beings' energy systems could make crystal ships travel faster. Heian realized this information could be important. She asked Hyunwoo to prepare a presentation for the next meeting. The aliens had begun to trust the humans because the Whisper was so small and weak. Perhaps they would listen to what Hyunwoo had found. The next day, Hyunwoo stood nervously before the alien leaders. He was not used to speaking to important people. His hand shook as he showed his first chart. Respected leaders, he began. You have both created amazing technologies. But fighting has kept you from sharing your discoveries. Look at these examples. He showed how crystal technology could solve void problems, and void technology could help crystal ships. Both sides listened carefully. No one had ever compared their technologies this way before. Your scientists could work together, Hyunwoo suggested. You could build better ships, safer homes, new ways to explore space. You could do so much more as friends than as enemies. A crystal being's light pulsed with interest. Your void energy systems could help our mining ships work faster. Your light shields could protect our civilian transports, a void being responded. Ambassador Kita smiled as he watched them talk. The aliens were no longer thinking about war. They were thinking about working together. None of this would have happened on a big human ship, he said quietly to Heian. They trust us because we are small. They know we cannot threaten them. Heian nodded. Our weakness became our strength. They let us close because we were no danger to them. And now, they're seeing new possibilities. The alien leaders spent hours talking about Hyunwoo's findings. They called their scientists to discuss ways they could work together. The meeting room was crowded and noisy, full of excited voices speaking different languages. Look at them, Officer Yoonji said to Hyunwoo. You did this. Your research showed them a better way. Hyunwoo watched the aliens share ideas. I just showed them what was already there. They were so busy fighting. They never stopped to see how much they could help each other. That evening, the crystal beings and void beings did something they had not done in 800,000 years. They shared their knowledge freely with each other. In the Whisper's small meeting room, ancient enemies began planning a future where they would work together instead of fighting. The smallest ship in Earth's fleet, Heian wrote in her log, helped 2 mighty civilizations take their first step toward peace. Sometimes being small and weak lets you go places where the strong and powerful cannot go. Ambassador Kita stood before the leaders of both civilizations in the Whisper's small meeting room. After weeks of talks, this was the most important moment. The room felt too warm and crowded, but no one complained. I have a suggestion, Kita said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. The asteroid belt that started this war, what if we turned it into something new? Not a place to fight over, but a place to work together. The crystal beings and void beings looked at each other. Their leaders had gathered in greater numbers today, making the small room feel even smaller. "What do you suggest?" asked the head crystal, its light dimming with curiosity. Keita pressed a button, showing a detailed plan on the screen. "A joint research station, built and run by both your peoples. A place where crystal and void scientists can work together, share discoveries, and create new technologies." The first void leaned forward, its star-like spots twinkling. "And who would control this station?" "Both of you," Keita said. "And if you agree, Earth would provide neutral observers to help maintain peace. Small ships like the Whisper, carrying diplomats and scientists who can help when needed." Dr. Jaiwan stepped forward with more details. "Your children could study there together. Your artists could create together. Your scientists could solve problems together." The alien leaders talked among themselves. The crystal beings' light patterns showed they were excited. The void beings' stars sparkled with interest. "But who would protect this station?" a crystal being asked. Captain Heiyun spoke up. "Both of you would. Your strongest chips, working together to guard peace instead of making war. Think how much safer your people would be if you protected them together." Professor Tahyun, who had studied their languages deeply, noticed something remarkable. "Listen," he whispered to Yunji. "They're starting to use the same words for together and future. Their languages are growing closer." The head crystal rose to speak. "For 800,000 years, we have been enemies. We forgot why we fought, but we kept fighting. Perhaps it is time to remember how to be friends instead." The first void stars glowed brightly. "Our children have never known peace. They hide in the darkness while we fight. Maybe they deserve to see the light." Keita held his breath as the alien leaders moved closer together. The room was so small that they had to stand side by side. Maybe that was a good thing. It made them face the future together. "We agree," both leaders said at almost the same time. Their voices, one like crystal chimes and one like deep space echoes, mixed together perfectly. The Whisper's crew watched as the leaders began planning the new research station. Crystal engineers talked excitedly with void scientists about building designs. They had to speak quietly because the room was so small, but their excitement was clear. "Our weakest ship," Heiyun said softly to her crew, "just helped make the strongest piece in the galaxy." That night, as the Whisper floated between the two mighty fleets, its small size seemed different. It wasn't a sign of weakness anymore. It was proof that the smallest things could make the biggest changes. 1 month later, the Whisper hosted the final peace ceremony. Captain Heiyun had worried that her small ship would not be grand enough for such an important event, but both sides had insisted on signing the peace agreement here. "Your small ship brought us together," the head crystal had said. "It should be where we make our peace official." The signing ceremony was simple because it had to be. The Whisper's meeting room could not hold many people. The crystal beings and void beings sat close together, their leaders shoulder to shoulder at the small table. Ambassador Keita presented the peace agreement. It was written in 3 languages: crystal, void, and human. Professor Tahyun had worked hard to make sure every word meant the same thing in all 3 languages. "Today," Keita said, "we end 800,000 years of war. But more importantly, we begin a new age of friendship." The head crystal and the first void signed their names together. As they did, something beautiful happened. The crystal being's light and the void being's stars seemed to dance together, creating patterns no one had ever seen before. "Look," Dr. Jaiwan whispered, "even their signatures make heart together." Outside the Whisper's windows, both fleets began to change position. Instead of facing each other ready to fight, they turned to form a circle. Crystal ships and void ships flew side by side, protecting the space where their new research station would be built. "The first supply ships have already left their hiding places," Officer Yunji reported happily. "Civilian vessels from both sides are coming out to help build the station." Minho, working at his communication station, smiled as he listened to the messages between the fleets. "They're not using war codes anymore. They're just talking normally, helping each other find safe travel routes. Sun Mai had prepared a special tea ceremony to celebrate the peace. As she served tea to the leaders, they talked about their hopes for the future. The crystal beings spoke of teaching void children about light art. The void beings promised to show crystal young ones how to sing star songs. "We will name the research station Whisper," the first void announced, "to remind us that sometimes the quietest voice brings the biggest change." The head crystal agreed, "And we will always keep a place there for human ships like this one, small ships that carry big dreams." That evening, after the ceremony, Captain Hei-yun gathered her crew one last time in the meeting room. Earth was calling them home. Their mission was complete. "I'm proud of all of you," she said. "We came here in the smallest ship in the fleet. Everyone thought we were too weak to help, but we proved that being small can be a strength." She looked at each crew member: Ki-ta, the patient ambassador; Ji-won, the careful observer; Ta-hyun, the skilled translator; Yoon-ji, the sharp-eyed officer; Min-ho, the dedicated communicator; Sun-mi, the thoughtful diplomat; and Hyun-woo, the curious scientist. "We didn't end this war with weapons or power," she continued. "We ended it with understanding, kindness, and respect. Remember that always." As the Whisper prepared to leave, both fleets formed an honor guard. Crystal ships and void ships lit up the space together, creating a beautiful path for the small human vessel to follow home. The longest war in the galaxy had ended not with a mighty battle, but with quiet words in a small room. And a tiny ship called Whisper had shown that sometimes the smallest things could change the universe.